Welcome to Fun and Fundraising, everybody. The podcast where we talk with people and experiences behind top nonprofit galas and signature fundraising events to showcase how they positively transform their communities. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, and today I am joined by a special guest co-host.
Hey everyone, it's Lance Avery Morgan. Always great to join you as a co-host, especially with such fun, cool subjects like we have today.
Absolutely. So today's subject is a really interesting one. So one of the things that any good fundraising event or any good event period will have are great signature cocktails. And we're fortunate enough to have André Darlington as a guest. And André has written about a dozen different books on cocktails. And we thought with National Cowboy Day coming up here in July, we thought we would talk about his new book he has out called Cowboy Cocktails, 60 Recipes Inspired by the American West. So with that, André, welcome. And thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I love this cross-section of cocktails and fundraising, so I'm excited to have this discussion because, as you can imagine, cocktails are pretty popular at fundraisers. So this is going to be a fun conversation. Everybody gets to see behind the scenes what happens.
And it almost like the more the cocktails, the higher the fundraising level amount.
Absolutely.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it is funny how just, I didn't even think of it really when I was starting out, but I get so many calls. I do a lot of, nonprofit stuff. So a lot of fundraising for, obviously I did a music book. So, radio stations, but, book festivals and that kind of stuff. So it's a topic I know well. This and weddings, right? Everybody wants a wedding cocktail.
That's a different type of drunk, though.
Yeah.
So that it is at a gala where there's a little bit of business to be had. Let's just say,
Yes.
for lack of a better term. So you were talking a little bit in the green room of this was kind of an unexpected path for you. The books that the dozen books or so that you've written. So talk about where your path to becoming an author of over a dozen different cocktail books.
Yeah, I'll do the quick as I can version so we can get into the meat of stuff. But I came in through being a writer for, I was actually a food writer first. I became a restaurant reviewer. I switched over into wine writing, and it started to take off, and I decided I wanted to be a wine writer. And there was an event I was chosen as a fellow for the Napa Valley Vintners Association. And I had another day job. I was in IT for years. And I always did this writing at night. So I was kind of freelancing. And I reached the point where I couldn't do I couldn't do the writing and keep this full-time IT job. I was on call and, had the BlackBerry and the whole thing. And I couldn't do both. And I got this award and I went out to Napa and I thought, this is it. I'm going to do something really dumb, which is quit a really great paying day job and follow my dream. And I did that a little over 10 years ago. And it's kind of one of those things when you leap, there has to be a step for you because there's no option. And within a year, I had a restaurant up and running. Which hadn't been really in a plan, but it came along. And then the book deal started. It really started with I pitched a food and a cheese and wine book with my sister. She was a cheese writer, and I was writing about wine. And they came back and they said, we love the voice, we love what you guys are doing, but wine market, at least at that time, they're like wine books don't sell so well. But I'd already written cocktail columns. And I kind of was a huge cocktail aficionado. So we wrote a cocktail book that ended up doing really well because we were the first one to go in chronological order. Cocktail books at that time went by base spirit, or they went alphabetically, which are just like horrible ways to try and figure out what you want to drink tonight. And we wrote the cocktail book that we wanted to have ourselves as home sort of enthusiasts. We were both writers. We called ourselves writers with drinking problems, right? Or drinkers with writing problems. One of the two. And from that, it just started to go, and it was one book after another. And I never thought I'd be here. I ended up getting a phone call to do the book for Batman for Gotham City Cocktails. So that came along. I did a book called Booze Cruise, and I became the first cocktail writer to circumnavigate the globe in 100 years. There was a guy named Charles H. Baker who did it between the two world wars. I ended up doing that all the way up to cowboy cocktails. And this is a funny one. I'll wrap it up here, but I got it was really funny. I was sitting at home and different book deals were coming in, and it was during the pandemic. And I got a really strong NDA, non-disclosure agreement. And I was trying to have a meeting, and I was trying to figure out, who is this? Who could be calling? I thought, for some reason, I was with the publisher I was working for, I thought it was going to be a book for Lara Croft Tomb Raider. This is just where I thought it was. So I get on the phone, and behind the NDA is Ethan Wayne, John Wayne's son. And, I'm sitting on the computer. I'm like, wow, I did all this research on Lara Croft, and now I'm talking to John Wayne's family. I don't even know. I've seen the movies, of course. I know the Searchers. This kind of thing. But it put me in a whole different world. So that's how this cowboy thing got started, in a way, is that I had done the John Wayne book for a different publisher. But the cowboy thing was, the appeal is how much history is there and how interesting it is. So that's how I got to talking to you guys today, a very short version.
Okay, well, there was something in what you said that I found particularly fascinating that I want you to elaborate on. And the fact that you are the first cocktail writer to have circumnavigated the globe in 100 years, since Charles H. Baker did that. So talk about how that came to be. And, because I got to imagine that, since you're the only one who's done it in a century, there is no, I wrote a roadmap to do this. So I want to know how this kind of organically and spontaneously combusted, for lack of a better word, and happened.
Yeah, so books are a little bit like how people imagine or know about movies, in that you have an agent and you put ideas out there, and the agent sort of shops them around, and then something comes back to you. Sometimes it's the idea that you put in the hopper, and sometimes something grabs somebody's eye and they're like, oh, I love that you wanted to do this, but how about this? So this is a classic example of we had gone through this huge cocktail explosion in the United States, and nobody had really focused on the food part of that. Here's all these cocktail bars. And so I said, I want to go around the country. I had already been around the country on book tour and stuff, but, there was some of these famous cocktail bars that are doing such a great job that we know that are also incorporating food as bar snacks. Let me do an American bar snack of the moment book. And the publisher said, yeah, that's a really lovely idea. We'd love to make it international. One of these, give an inch, take a mile, right?
Sure.
So I said, we can do that. I'm well-traveled, ish enough. I mean, no one's ever well-traveled enough to do, something that broad a scope. But I said specifically, I haven't seen what's going on in Singapore, which really became a cocktail epicenter globally, and just Asia in general. In the last 5 years, 10 years have just, they took to the cocktail, and, all these fancy hotel bars over there doing just amazing work. So that idea got hatched. Well, I'm going to go around the world. So I started it in Berlin. I went around the world in 65 days. Basically, it was, 4 or 5 days in each city. And crazily enough, I went, all the way. I ended up in Japan in early 2020, very early 2020. And we had already heard that something was going on in China. I had just been in Shanghai. I had been in Seoul. And I flew back into LAX as the entire globe shut down. It was just this phenomenal experience where it's like, okay, we just did this. Am I a time capsule now? So I came back and I wrote the book, and I was like, is anything going to survive from this book? Is this just going to be this footnote to history? But luckily, since I've gone back to some of these places, I traveled quite a bit last year abroad, and just the resilience that people have, and these bars still exist. And, each city, I was shocked. They might have lost 1 or 2 places, but now, of course, have 6 more, So it just, it was definitely a crazy blip. But that, again, also is kind of the short version of how I ended up going around the world.
Exactly.
How cool, though. I think you're sort of the Charles Lindbergh of cocktails, if you will.
There's a lot of
really good analogy.
What's so amazing is bartending and the brands, for sure, are sending salespeople, and there's all these, we know about all Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans, but these things are Bar Convent. These things are happening all over the world. There's not that many writers, mainly because no magazine. This is the luck that I just had already had a few books. No magazine is really going to be like, have the coin to be like, let's send this guy around the world. But a
Yeah,
publisher, it's like, well, let's just make this a whole book.
sure.
Right out of the gate. So yeah, it was a phenomenal, phenomenal experience.
Now, did you do your own photography as well, Andre? Because all the books that you've done, the photography is stunning, but I'm just wondering how you do that logistically with, like a creative crew, or is it just you as sort of a lone ranger?
It is a creative crew. So basically, I'm a lone ranger the entire process.
Yeah.
And then I get this magical moment where I hand it in and I get to go. And I don't know that it's typical anymore. I think a lot of authors, they're farming things out. And some of my books, I've not been in the studio. But for some of my bigger books, I've been able to fly in and be in the studio. I actually lived in Philly for a while where one of my publishers is located so that I could be on these shoots. And
Yeah.
it's just magical thing. And they hire a stylist and, I did these books called Booze and Vinyl,
Yeah, I
and the
love it.
publisher basically rents a hotel room for a week, and we shoot the book in this hotel room to get this like party vibe for those books and that kind of thing.
I loved your Booze and Vinyl Christmas edition that
Yes.
recently. That was really fun. Congrats on that too.
Oh, thanks so much. That was so much fun. I love Christmas music. I think I like Christmas music, but not everyone does. And to the extent that it's played, it starts in September now, basically.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I found so many. There's so many Christmas music lovers. But that was fun. So this one, I wasn't able to be in the studio. Lots of back and forth with the creative direction on this cowboy book. Um, it's funny. Some books are kind of a hike up the hill.
Mhm.
This book, the design team, the photography, everything just came together. And I'd like to think part of it is like I've done it before, but you know what? It never gets any easier, which is kind of
Sure.
crazy. It gets different, but it never really gets, everyone's like, "Oh, you just write these books." I'm like, "No, it's a struggle every time." But this one it had some magic behind it. I think because the theme is so strong, there aren't cowboy cocktail books. So, they got to make up sort of this vernacular for it, the deep leather colors and
Yep.
they sent me the photos. I'm just like, they're like, "I hope you like these." I'm like, "I love
Beautiful.
these."
Yeah, the photography is so lush and so elegant as well. So, usually when you think of cowboy and that sort of thing, it's not as elevated as this book really is. So congrats.
Yeah, thank you. I travel a lot and I go around the country quite a bit, and I have a fair sense of like who are buying the books and who are coming to events. And I do feel like the cocktail experience is an elevated experience always, kind of.
Yeah,
So it's like, you can have these sort of dusty bourbon drinks, but you don't need a book to tell you how to do that.
right.
So this is more like, yeah, let's have the good glassware and let's have some fun stuff. And what was fascinating for me in researching the book is it's not as far off the historical mark as we all think. I
Yeah,
think we think of these cowboys as sort of being these rough and tumble guys that drank whiskey neat.
yeah,
They had a real sweet tooth. When they got money from coming in from doing these cattle drives, they
yeah,
wanted champagne, they wanted oysters.
yeah.
And it's funny, these were some fancy gents, there were some dandies out there.
I guess you have a lot of time to think about when you're on the horse, when you're getting off the horse, and what you're going to do, right?
Yeah, and what was so amazing is, they would get off the horse, go into town, shower,
Yeah,
and then they would go hunting for literally sweets and things with eggs in them. They
yeah.
wanted baked goods, they wanted pie, they
Okay.
wanted really sugar because there was no
Mhm.
sugar on the road and there
Right.
were no eggs on the road. So those were huge, and that just fascinated me, that
Yeah,
these guys are drinking some what would have been called, fancy drinks.
sure.
That's what they were after.
So, before we start hopping in and talking about, cocktails per se and kind of with events and stuff, talk about a little bit about some trends in cocktails that you're seeing, especially coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah, coming out of the pandemic, and it was already happening a little bit before, I would call it sort of a minimalist cocktailing.
Mhm.
A lot of three ingredient cocktails, a lot of stuff because what was interesting was the pandemic was actually fantastic for cocktails
Mhm.
because people sat at home, they watched YouTubes, they bought books, they educated themselves about cocktails and making them and got into it. And so many of the cocktails that were coming out pre-pandemic and this still happens, and bars can get away with it. you're evaporating things, you're making fancy syrups, you're putting in ingredients no one's ever heard of, which you should be doing as a bar because it's how you get people off the couch into a bar, you know, doing something that you can't, it's why we go out to eat. We can't make that amazing sushi at home, you know, all the time. So we want to have that. But for home people, it really is a matter of, you know, keeping it simple enough. I always make sure in my books that, yeah, I want to use fun, interesting ingredients too, but I want to make sure that people everywhere can get what's in the book and the stuff that I'm calling for. And I don't want it to be so complicated that you know, level is like you look at the book, you have it on your coffee table, but you never really use it. I really want people to use it. I'm a huge proselytizer for cocktails. I'm an egalitarian for cocktails. I believe that everybody should be able to make themselves a good martini or Manhattan at home and realize how pretty simple it is to do with a few equipment, you know, a little bit of equipment and a few ingredients. And I believe that enriches people's lives and also makes them better consumers when they go out. So that's one. Really quick, umami flavors really in. So minimalism, flavor, and I would say sustainability is still big on people's charts. Reusing stuff that's from the kitchen if they're a restaurant, or if we're at home, you know, using stuff from your garden, that kind of stuff is still in. So those are sort of the big things of the year. Bourbon's obviously still huge, and bitter, which is bitter is the big story of my career when I first started drinking. Way back in the day, no one drank Campari. You know, no one drank anything
Right.
bitter. Maybe the old crusty guy with the beard at the end of the bar was still drinking Campari, and now everyone loves Negronis and Boulevardiers and these things. So bitter is a big flavor. You know, I never thought I saw like Negronis at weddings and stuff. You know, like what? All right, awesome, we're in a new world. You know, so those are kind of the big trends I would say.
Fantastic. And there was one thing that you mentioned that I think this is the perfect segue into talking a little bit more about events and stuff is you were saying that simplicity was in, there's lots of three ingredient cocktails. And especially if you're hosting a larger event for somebody, if you can create something really elegant with three ingredients, that makes the bar turn a lot faster and it makes people a little bit less anxious and the line a little bit shorter, to do that. So, with that, I kind of want to talk a little bit about, certain types of events and cocktails. And do you find that certain spirits tend to be served more at certain types of events, whether it's a vodka, a bourbon, a whiskey, a gin, a tequila, or whatever it may be?
I do. I feel like so I have sort of it's like a two-part thing I think we're talking about. One is accessibility in the three-part drink. One is just, makeability, like ease of use for so often I'm sure you guys know in events you're hiring some sort of outside usually it's an outside vendor, right? That's coming in to make a drink. Often you don't know the level that their staff has or what is going to happen. Some people come in and they're like, yeah, we make martinis every night. And other people come in and they're like, yeah, we're more of like a punch outfit and we're going to pour something from a pitcher. So I do, when I work with fundraisers, we do kind of settle on a drink. The drink is usually able to be pre-batched, right? So, we're not shaking drinks unless we know that vendor already. We've worked with them, what's up. They can handle it. Otherwise, if you're bespoke shaking for everybody, that's kind of a different experience than just, I want to come to this fundraiser and get a drink in my hand right away. And I owned a bar and restaurant, so I know how important it is. Once people walk in that door, the clock is ticking to get a drink in their hand. So I have some drinks that I like to do that do that really well. For a lot of events, I usually recommend that I feel like even at cocktail parties or just anecdotally in life, there are sort of the lemon vodka gin zone, and then there's sort of, in our country at least, the bourbon heavy down drink. And so the spiritus versus more the shaken and light. So I do often, when in doubt, I kind of go, the number one selling flavor profile will always be sort of citrus with vodka or gin, a lemony thing. After that, sort of a cherry. These are just sort of like things that bar culture, restaurant culture sort of has, that's why when you walk into a bar, that lemon vodka drink is at the top of that menu. It's probably their best seller. So there's stuff like that, but then things have changed and the type of event is different. And there's a lot more, I would say, spiritus and bourbon crowd. Just anecdotally, I've done, a lot of like silent auction items. and wow, those sort of bourbon or cowboy cocktails type thing gets the big hits for the donations, right? People love that stuff. And maybe it's because it's something that people can all agree on at home, let's go home and make bourbon drinks and have and grill,
Right.
so there's a lot of bourbon out there too. I hope that answers the question a little bit.
No, it absolutely does. And, I like that you explained that there's like really there's two lanes of cocktails. And, for organizations, if you've got two lanes of folks, have one that represents each one. And, definitely take Andre's recommendation of pre-batching. I think that that is really important and it allows the bar to turn much more quickly because I've been to many events where you hear people just complaining that the bar line is way
Yeah.
too long. And that's a way that you can,
Yeah.
you can really easily eliminate that.
Yeah, no one
And
wants to wait for a cocktail. As you said, time is money. You're on the clock, and that's part of the experience too. To your point earlier, is that having that cocktail will enliven and enrich
yes.
the experience as well, which
Yeah,
is
I do it selfishly. I mean, I know that, people meet each other in line and whatnot, but I do it selfishly because a lot of times I'll do a fundraiser and I'm giving a little spiel. Maybe I'm making a drink or just talking, or I've even done PowerPoints, which is insane doing cocktail
How
PowerPoints.
do
But
you
there
do
are fun.
PowerPoints at a
wow,
I make,
bar?
I
How does
make them
that work?
fun. I make them fun. But yeah, it's like too
wow.
much equipment to set up. But yeah, I trigger movies and stuff. It just do scenes. It's a whole
Well,
horse
that's
and pony show.
fun.
It's
Yeah,
fun. But so for me, I want people to come in with those first 15 minutes. People have not only been able to receive a drink, but they're already had it. Especially so many events will do kind of your first drink is on the house with your ticket.
yep.
And then you're going back up. And if people have their first drink, it really doesn't even matter what I say, which is fantastic. I mean, I know that I'm entertaining and I can be fun and all this, but they're having a great time. They're talking to their neighbor. They're having that first drink. The ice, the ice is broken, so to speak. Already. So it's really important to get a functional cocktail in people's hands, just basically hand it to people as they come in, especially if it's gratis. If they don't like it, then there's something else on the menu. Moving on. Um,
I have kind of a random question on this. Now, I don't know if you saw the Times article recently, you probably did, about how drinks are presented in different glasses and
yeah,
how some patrons will not drink the most basic bourbon, down home drink in a fancy glass with garnishing. They'll have the bartender put it in a more simpler glass. And the bartender's just trying to be creative and present more of an experience with whatever he's
right.
serving. What are your thoughts on that? Because I'm so curious about it.
It's a tough one. I mean, it's so, in a good craft cocktail bar, I mean, that glass is up and there's garnish on there in theory, because the whole point is it's part of the experience. Let's say a julep or a deconstructed julep
Yes.
or something,
Right.
and you've got just a slap of a mint leaf on top. No, and you have a customer that doesn't want to have it that way. One is to just explain that this is the point of the experience. You're going to smell that mint first, just try it. Obviously, the customer is always right. I do think that in the cocktail world, it just depends on the establishment. For bars and restaurants, a little easier because it just depends on your establishment, and you get a sense of who your clientele are right away.
Mhm.
I imagine fundraisers might be a little more difficult because the crowd changes, or some people that aren't gonna go down this road with you with the century experience. Which it always helps to have a little horse and pony show, because I kind of take people down a sensory experience. I'm like, this is in a fancy glass and I've slapped the mint and put it on top because, and then
Right.
it helps those people that wouldn't want to drink it that way. Like, oh, okay. It's not manly or whatever. It's not the wrong way to drink bourbon or whatever they think, it is a way to do it. And this is why. Doing that in a fundraiser is obviously difficult.
I'll bet.
It is, but it was. I'm glad you brought up. In that response, you were talking a little bit about like when people walk in the door and you're giving, you're giving them a cocktail. It's when you do things like that, you're setting the tone for the event that it's going to be an elevated experience.
Yes.
And that's really because it's one thing to do champagne when you walk in. That's elegant, but a cocktail is going to be elegant plus sophistication, just because there is a level of artistry more than just pouring and getting it up to a certain level in the glass that really helps make an event shine.
Yes, absolutely. And I find, again, something like, I'll fall back on, when in doubt, fall back on like a French 75, right? It's a champagne cocktail. it's a cocktail. People are like, I don't like champagne. Well, it's not champagne. I don't like gin. Well, it's not gin either. Try it. I promise you, it's lemon, champers and gin. You're gonna like it. And if you don't love it, you probably have finished it anyway, and then you can move on to the next offering.
Well,
Exactly.
I love that you were talking about, blending spirits. And, I want to go actually back to something that we were talking about earlier on, like with the Cowboys, and talk a little bit more about the book and some of the cocktails that are in
Yeah.
it. So, what's interesting was you mentioned, the Cowboys had a sweet tooth. So it's not, them just drinking, bourbon neat. And, when I perused the book, I was impressed that there was, it wasn't 60 brown drinks. Like
Right.
there was a range of stuff. So talk a little bit about how how the thought process in in finding the recipes for these cocktails and the various types of spirits that can be found in a cowboy cocktail book.
Yeah, so starting out, I knew that we were probably going to be in the bourbon tequila zone, which is a zone I love, but you're right. It could have ended up being 60 brown drinks, and it's my challenge to bring out all these different aspects of that. So each book I sort of do like almost like it's not like an inspo wall that you'd see on Pinterest, but it is kind of that for flavor in a way where I'm picking out, my colors and my palette, your palette, your flavor palette, your color palette kind of thing. And this one I knew, we're going barbecue flavors. We're going Southwest. I did a trip to San Antonio for this book to kind of get down in there. So many of the cattle drives began just south of San Antonio and came up. Spent some time, in Dallas. That kind of Fort Worth, obviously huge, right on the cattle trail that we're talking about here. And Austin, over to the side, but also they had water and the cattle were going through there too. I knew what the palette was going to be. I don't want to, again, going back to this minimalism and repeatability, I wanted to make sure that, if I use sage, I'm going to use sage a couple more times, but in interesting ways. You can make a sage syrup or, you can make an ancho syrup or something like that. And I'm going to use it a couple more times. So you have it in your fridge. There's a couple more things in my book. But also, you can go out to the internet and there'll be more out there too. So I'm not asking people to make stuff that's like, you're going to do this once, it's really complicated, and it's for this drink, So there's some of that kind of palette stuff. The drinks just kind of came together. I think I was queued up because I had done the John Wayne book, which is actually very different, even though he was known obviously as a famous cowboy. In his movies, this was historical. So this was really fun because the John Wayne is much more, this is inspired by ... And there are some movies in here too. You have to go, I think we all know cowboy lore from the movies.
Right.
But this one was much more really accurate flavors. The food in this book is food that cowboys ate. Not really inspired by. I mean, it's a little bit inspired, but it's really pretty legit, like an eggless cake. They didn't have eggs on the road, that kind of thing. Jerky, which they would carry with them and make gravy out of, which turns out is delicious. That kind of thing. So, and the drink kind of come together in this palette. I always make sure for each of my books that, it could be baby's first cocktail book. That happens a lot with something like this, where somebody gets it for dad or somebody gets it, that kind of thing. They're into cowboys. Oh, here's the cocktail book for it. So I want to make sure that, if you go through this book and it's your first time and it's your only cocktail book, you also will have hit some of the bigger shapes, like the old fashioned, a version of that, or even French 75, a version of that. And that you'll really know your history and be well-rounded. So it'll get you kind of turned on to cocktails too. So there's some of that going on as well. As far as technique, I have a house in North Carolina. I have a ginormous bar, which is like a research bar. I don't drink it all. It's for making the books. And I kind of whittle down which bottles I'm going to use. And then I come up with the drinks, and I actually fly a colleague of mine down, and we do the book in like 3 or 4 days. So from 7 in the morning till 6 at night with a break in between, we're cocktail testing the way you would if you were like opening a restaurant or something. So it's an intense process, but that process helps it really gel, So some of the drinks just sail through that process, and then some drinks we're working at all 3-4 days that he's here. By the 4th day, we're like, now we got it. So the drinks have all really been done and done again. My worry is always like, you don't want to go out to Amazon and be like, these drinks, I couldn't figure it out. It didn't taste the way it was supposed to taste, that kind of thing. So
Right.
repeatability and, not a minimalism necessarily, but yeah, I try to keep my drinks within the certainly 5 to 6 ingredients. That's including garnish, you know. Otherwise, it's just too much going on for the home bartender.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of like the Martha Stewart test kitchen for cocktails. From what you've just described, I'm like, I can only imagine, the process that you guys go through. It's
It's
incredible.
really intense. It's fun. You know, it's funny because when I was first starting out, I thought, oh, I need to recipe test these drinks, you know, the ones that I don't know. So I'm going to invite a bunch of friends over and they're going to sit in the living room and drinks will just come out from the bar to the living room and people will enjoy it. So we're not wasting things. You know, I mean, within a half hour, I'm not taking notes.
Right.
People are in the kitchen.
Yeah.
It's a house party.
Sure.
So we keep it pretty tight. It's just basically the two of us. We do put drinks in the refrigerator that we want to have after work. You know, we're like that was particularly good,
Yeah.
and we'll put it in the fridge for us. But otherwise, we're just kind of testing and going for it. He's a long time in the restaurant industry, and as you know, I was as well. So this is kind of how you workshop stuff behind the scenes, and we just go for it as if the book is like gonna open, you know, and people need to enjoy these drinks. There needs to be great variety for all types of people. The drinks need to work together. They can be processed and batched and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's fun. I mean, it's fun. It's gotten easier now that you know I'm on. You know, in the first couple of books, it's like, wow.
Yeah. That's awesome. Now you mentioned Texas and you mentioned San Antonio. I hope you visited the Esquire bar there.
Yeah,
Wasn't that cool?
I did go to the Esquire bar there. So cool.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of like kind of Tex-Mex food
Yeah.
anyway. I love all things about the Southwest. I've actually never lived in the Southwest, so I think that's part of it. You know, every time I go there, I'm like, oh, this is so great.
Yeah.
So many wonderful restaurants, and you know, the fun historical thing that I got from San Antonio. That relates to cocktails is all of those. You know, the Alamo is one of the missions, right? And so I was able to go on like a private tour of the missions. The gentleman took me around to
Yeah.
really get into. I think a lot of people just kind of want to see them, and I was like, no, I really need to know what they were doing here, commerce wise, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
And he was like, oh, interesting, you know. So they were making cochineal. They were growing the bugs that colored the red robes for the cardinals in Spain.
Right. Right.
So that same bug was used to color Amaro.
Uh-huh.
And so that's how you get the color in Campari. And so I'm sort of mind blown. I'm like, oh, okay, this is what these, you know, I mean, they were doing many things at those missions, but one of the major cash crops were these red bugs for dye.
Yeah.
Totally wild.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, Bruta Americano, a brand out of, I believe they're in I think they're out of San Francisco, still uses the bugs. I know people think this sounds gross, but you don't taste the bugs, you get the coloring.
Sure. The best part of the bugs, right?
Interesting part. Okay, so I have a question about, the upcoming National Day of the Cowboy. So it's always on the fourth Saturday of July each year, which
Right.
is 2024 is July 26th. What drink from the book will you have to toast that day from your new Cowboy Cocktails book?
That's a great question. So I had to put I'm putting my hat on into the future, and I'm in North Carolina. I know you guys are in Austin, so it's going to be 100 degrees, right? Anywhere that there are cowboys, that it'll be 100 degrees. So I actually went with something a little on the refreshing side. A
Okay.
lot of the drinks again in this book are pretty, they're still pretty cowboy. We talked a little bit how the cowboys love sugar and they were drinking fancier drinks than we think. We have sort of an idealized version from movies, but what was happening in reality were these were pretty young men that they had just gotten out of the Civil War. Most of them, they were poor, they didn't know much, and they certainly hadn't been exposed to anything fancy in their lives. And so when they got the kind of money that they were making being cowboys, they spent it gambling and they spent it on cocktails and good drinks. But one of the fun ones that's refreshing in the book is the I'm Your Huckleberry,
Okay.
which I think we all know from Tombstone. Val Kilmer says it. Some of the fun of doing this book was finding out that he actually said that in real life, and they wrote it down, and it's like in the annals of that was his line before they fought, you know. So I thought that made it legit for me, you know, to put it in the book that it actually happened. But the I'm Your Huckleberry is bourbon, huckleberry, lemon juice, a little Angostura bitters, and a lemon twist. And huckleberry is a fruit, is a berry. And I found out how much foraging they were doing on these cattle drives, right? They basically had some flour and some beef jerky with them, and You know, it was pretty limited. But in order to not get scurvy, they found green onions.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they wouldn't bring honey with them, but every once in a while they'd stumble on a beehive and then they'd have honey. But one of the big crops that they would run into is huckleberry, and you can get a huckleberry syrup in a lot of grocery stores or online. Um, and it's just a kind of a delicious little bit of Americana with some lemon in there too.
That sounds delicious, and that
Sure
sounds that blends the cowboy with the summer heat. I think
Yeah.
probably the most beautiful, the most beautiful way possible. So I know we're coming up on time here, but you're the perfect person to ask this question. And I can't wait to hear your answer. And that is, what is one thing all great cocktails have in common?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say care. So one of the things that I talk about in all my books, there's a little section on craft, and I never want to go overboard on craft. But if you think about what makes a cocktail great and elevates it to, and not just drinking, but an experience, and it's paying attention to glassware, putting your glassware in the, if you have room, putting your glassware in the freezer. If you have coops or something like that, or paying attention to ice. You don't have to go like clear ice, but getting those silicone trays with square ice. It's amazing how, with a little bit of care, I would say that people are shocked how close they can get to the cocktails that they are being served at bars, because all the bars are doing are really thinking about your glassware, thinking about your temperature, thinking about using quality ingredients, thinking about, this is a great one, thinking about garnish before you've made the drink, right? There's nothing worse than being like, oh, I'm making juleps. I've got the ice. I've got the whiskey. Where's the mint? Where's the mint?
Yeah.
The mint? Oh, the mint's been sitting out for a half hour. Oh no, the mint's wilted. That kind of thing. All they're doing is really paying attention to these ingredients, like like you would if you were making something, really delicious food-wise too. You just put, your meat. Chefs talk about mise en place, right? Having everything ready before you start.
Yeah.
Same with cocktails. Put your equipment out, put your jars out, or your bottles out, and that kind of thing. And it's amazing how great things can be. So I guess that would be it. I mean, I've kind of made a career out of like so-called craft cocktails, and I really think that that's kind of what craft means. We don't mean anything special other than pay attention to these things and make it nice for yourself. Or even better, make it, the best thing is making cocktails is great. Being served one by, a loved one is even better, right? So just, taking care of yourself and each other in a way that the bars are taking care of us. So I would say care.
And you'd mentioned ice. How important is filtered water that creates ice, since your ice melts in your drink? What are your thoughts on that? I'm curious.
You're gonna taste it. You're gonna taste the difference. Just like if you make coffee at home and you use filtered water and you don't, that's a great test as well. I'm not saying it's bad or different. It depends on your water. If you have really hard water, you're gonna taste those minerals. It's not a deal breaker. So people talk a lot about ice. The great news is that home freezers make great ice. When I was first starting out drinking, everybody had those huge blown bubble thin ice cubes. That's what we were getting rid of. And what they did was make ice very quickly for a business, and they took up a lot of volume, right? So volume and speed was the name of the game. At home, you have what I would call slow ice. You put ice in the freezer, it takes forever to freeze it. That's great ice. It's making you quality ice. You are going to taste stuff. The one thing I say too to people is, if you're going to have a cocktail party though, just start with fresh ice, because if you have any frozen shrimp or peas or anything in that, or lasagna in that freezer, that ice will take on those flavors.
Yeah.
So unless you're doing a Manhattan that you want to taste like leftover lasagna, you want
you want it to taste like the Hudson River, maybe? Yeah.
Exactly. If you're making martinis and you want it to taste, smell like the frozen shrimp it was next to, which is a style. I'm not saying it's bad.
Oh my gosh. Wow, that's such a trip.
That is a good one. That's a good note to end on. And this was such a fun conversation. I hope you'll come back with your next book, and we can do this again, because I think we only just scratched the surface in terms of how cocktails really help elevate events. So Andre, congrats on the book, and thank you again for the time today.
Thank you guys so much. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And for more information on Andre Darlington and his newest book, Cowboy Cocktails, 60 Recipes Inspired by the American West, please visit andredarlington.com. And that will do it for this special episode of Fun and Fundraising. I'm Rob Giardinelli.
I'm Lance Avery Morgan.
And we're reminding you to keep it fun, keep it interesting, and your guests will have a great time. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.